Marco's laugh echoed in my mind. You wouldn't last a day without me, Elena. That's when I decided our cozy suburban home would make a lovely, just-sold postcard to mail to his office. My name is Elena Vasquez, and life had a way of testing me. 5 years ago, I married Marco, a charming coworker with a sharp wit and an alluring smile. Fallen by a mutual passion for success, we became a power couple at the office, only to face our vulnerability at home. The dream of nurturing a family together began to crumble with each failed pregnancy test. The hallways of fertility clinics became painfully familiar as we exhausted options, drained emotions, and dwindled savings. By the time I felt the first flutters of life within me, I had weathered a storm of hormone injections and hope. It wasn't just one heartbeat echoing during the ultrasound. It was two. We named our miracles Gabriel and Sophia. Marco's initial elation at the news of twins soon faded into a distant interest. His involvement was sporadic at best, absent at most. Nights blurred with feedings and diaper changes, often solo endeavors, as Marco distanced himself, citing workplace exhaustion. My love for the twins was unbounded, but in the dark circles under my eyes and the ache in my bones, I knew this wasn't the partnership I'd signed up for. Gabriel and Sophia arrived early, fighters from the start. While they lay in the NICU, I laid plans for their future. But Marco, he was like an anchor, dragging my determination through the murky waters of doubt. I pledged to myself that our children would never feel the burden of their father's inattention, a vow heavy with consequence and courage. The first year of their life tested everything I knew about strength. As my body labored to recover, my resolve strained under the weight of Marco's apathy. Support. He called his occasional peeks into their nursery, peppering his absence with excuses and unfulfilled promises. The inequality of our roles grew, a chasm I could no longer bridge with love alone. Yet, the thought of leaving never gained momentum for long. My father had grown sick, the kind of illness that drains life in slow sips. With my mother having passed years before, he had nobody else. And as for me, with no job and savings devoured by IVF, I was tethered to Marco's erratic benevolence like a boat adrift, dependent on his mercies and whims. That day when the vase shattered against the floor, the water drenching my skin, I understood the capacity of our bond's fracture. But I had made a choice to ensure it would not break me. I mopped the floors, silenced the warning of desperation in my heart, and planned. Because all it takes is a moment for fate to align with fortitude, and that moment had come. I just had to reach out and grasp it tightly. The morning sun slanted through the blinds, casting long shadows across what was once a nursery, now a war zone of scattered toys and overturned furniture. Sophia's wails cut through the silence, a shrill reminder that today, like every other day, I would face alone. Gabriel, ever the explorer, had managed to find the one remaining family heirloom, a silver picture frame my grandmother had given me, and was using it as a chew toy. I wrestled it away, my heart sinking. The last piece of my past, the last bit of value I owned other than the roof over our heads, would soon have to be sold. The weight of that decision pulled at my chest, a physical ache that seemed to spread with each labored breath. As much as that frame was a symbol of my heritage, it was now a lifeline, a ticket to keep the lights on and the cupboards from growing bare. Marco, on the other hand, remained blissfully oblivious to the depth of our financial troubles. He had a knack for evading responsibility, an art form he had perfected over the years. I returned to the workforce not by choice but necessity, dropping the twins off at a daycare that drained an already sparse bank account. My absence from the office had made me a stranger in the world I used to dominate, my confidence replaced with apologies and hasty exits whenever the daycare would call about another fever or cough. My supervisors were understanding, yet their patience had limits I dared not test. Each sick day, each rush home felt like a twisted countdown to my professional demise. On one occasion, I mustered the courage to ask Marco for help, yet his excuses danced around any reasonable offer. "I can't. I have a meeting," he would say, or, "They're just kids. They get sick." The burden of solo parenting lay heavy on my shoulders, a mantle I wore out of love for my children, but it was wearing me thin. Resignation from my job was not a choice but a conclusion, the result of countless pressures culminating in a silent scream for reprieve. I confided in my father, whose frailty belied a fierce will. "Elena, my girl, you've borne more than anyone should," he whispered, drawing me close. His hands, once strong, now trembled against my back. "Let me take some of this weight." But how could I? His health teetered on a precarious edge, his life a finicky balance of medication and rest. Adding my burdens to his would be unforgivable. Yet, he insisted, adamant in his resolve. "Family lifts each other up," he said, his voice a feather yet heavy with conviction. "We'll find our way through this. Just you wait." My father's assurance was a balm, but it couldn't replace a paycheck. The guilt was a routine visitor, making itself at home within me as I saw the worry etch deeper into his face with every passing day. I was trapped, not by love or duty, but by necessity, a slave to the circumstances I couldn't escape. The silver frame sold to a faceless buyer for a soul-crushing sum, all too soon spent on necessities. As I slid the money over the counter for a week's worth of groceries, the reality of my situation seemed to sharpen into painful focus. I was at the end of my rope, the ends frayed and unwinding. It was time for the charade to end. It was time to fight back. Uneasy light filtered through the blinds, casting a dull glow over the toys strewn across the floor. The walls of our home, a place that once harbored the whispers of shared dreams, now stood silent, guarding the secret of my crumbling marriage. As Marco's shadow loomed large and menacing within our lives, my space for hope dwindled. His ire had no bounds, no line it wouldn't cross. His voice, once soft and filled with affection, now clenched with contempt. He was a tempest, his anger the crashing waves, and I, a ship made of glass, threatened to shatter with the smallest misstep. The day he hurled his cell phone across the room, narrowly missing Gabriel, who giggled, oblivious to the danger, was the day my tolerance reached its nadir. But there was a spark, faint and flickering, in the gloom. A ray of light began to slip through the shadows. My father. With his health improving and Grandma finally settled into a nursing facility, he was determined to shoulder part of my burden. His arrival marked the first breath of fresh air in a home that had grown stifling. "Lean on me, Elena," he urged, taking the twins in his arms with surprising dexterity for his age. "I'm not made of glass. Let me help you rebuild." And so, with the twins in safer hands, I set off to reclaim the life I had on hold. I reached out to Isabel, my former boss and mentor, who had risen through the ranks with a grace I had always admired. The call was the first step in executing the plan that had brewed in the recesses of my mind, our small act of defiance against Marco's tyranny. "Isabel, it's Elena. I'm thinking of returning to work," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Isabel's response was prompt, sympathetic to the point of painful. "I suspected as much," she confided, a hint of something more in her tone. "There's been something you should know about Marco. Can you come in tomorrow?" The next day, the old familiarity of the office wrapped around me like a well-worn glove as I sat across from Isabel. Despite our formal attire and the polished wood of the desk between us, the atmosphere was intimate, protectively confidential. "He's been unfaithful, Elena," Isabel divulged, cutting straight to the heart of a truth I had already sensed. "With a client's daughter. It's more than gossip. There are receipts, and, well, people have seen them together." The realization stung, a sickening confirmation of the distance between us, yet it was ammunition for what was to come. It propelled me forward, a catalyst for my resolve. I laid bare my intentions for divorce, my need for independence, and Isabel responded not just with support, but with action. She fast-tracked my return to the company, championing my cause with the vigor of a true ally. With every piece that fell into place, I saw the path before me clear, and with a surge of newfound courage I was ready to make move. The evening I set my plan in motion. The house felt larger, the silence louder. Outside, the sunset bled across the sky, a canvas of defiance. Inside, my father whispered stories to the twins as I packed their bags, preparing for the upheaval to come. Marco's business trip was a timely blessing, and with the ink still wet on my letter of resignation, I knew there would be no turning back this time. Every item packed away, every photograph removed from the walls, was a declaration. I was off to change the locks, hand over the house keys to the realtor, and finally step out of the prison Marco had unwittingly built around us. The following morning I left our now bare house, the echo of emptiness reverberating with each step I took. Walking into the office, my nerves buzzed undeniably. A mix of anxiety and adrenaline surged through me. The familiar sights and sounds of the workplace greeted me like old friends long missed. Isabel welcomed me with a warm, conspiratorial smile that did little to quell the flurry of butterflies in my stomach. "You're doing the right thing," Isabel reassured, her gaze steady, her words a solid anchor. "You're taking back control." Her office, once a place for career advice, now served as the backdrop to the unfolding drama of my personal life. Isabel closed the door with a decisive click and, without preamble, unveiled Marco's betrayal in somber detail. He had taken far more than his share of liberties. His affair with the daughter of one of our clients, not just an insult but a liability. It wasn't just our company's reputation at stake, but his professional future. Images of them together lurched at me from the fringes of my mind, yet the revelation steeled me. I wouldn't let his indiscretions be my undoing. "Thank you," I murmured, the weight of the situation settling around me like a cloak. "He won't get away with this." Isabel proceeded to lay out the groundwork for my return to work. As it turned out, they needed someone with my expertise and experience. "It's your second act, Elena," she said, her voice a blend of excitement and firm resolution. But the opportunities didn't end there. After discussing possible starts and positions, Isabel revealed another game-changing detail: a newly implemented on-site daycare, a solution to one of the many complicated puzzles of my life. There was a light at the end of the tunnel, and it was finally bright enough to chase away the shadows that had settled in my heart. Armed with this fresh knowledge and a plan that grew bolder by the minute, I left Isabel's office poised for the impending confrontation. The empty house wasn't just a sign of a life shed. It was the first stone in the foundation of a new one. My father, God bless his resolute heart, backed me every step of the way. It was our secret. A quiet rebellion danced out in the signing of papers and whispers of change. The real estate agent, understanding the delicacy of the situation, had agreed to act quickly. As I met with the realtor, who was keen to capitalize on the property's prime location, I signed off on what was undeniably my most assertive act yet. The house was more mine than Marco's, purchased with my pre-marriage savings and therefore mine to sell. I reflected, not without a twinge of irony, how little Marco had cared for the old place, dismissing it as a temporary inconvenience while we climbed the corporate ladder. Yet now it would become the very instrument of my liberation. The plan was set into motion with a precision that would have impressed even my toughest critics at work. With the realtor's help, we moved swiftly, securing a buyer and moving my family into a comfortable rental. My father, with renewed vigor, was already making the space our own, filling it with laughter and plans for the future. As I lay in bed that evening, staring at the ceiling in the quiet before sleep, the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. I'd taken back my life, my children's future, and secured our escape. There was no turning back now. The glass doors of the office building seemed heavier than I remembered, but today they parted with the promise of new beginnings. A chorus of unfamiliar yet friendly faces welcomed me, the employees I would soon work alongside. With each step, I anchored myself in the reality of my fresh start. The cloak of anonymity I'd worn during my time away had been shed. I was Elena Vasquez, soon to be Elena Vasquez, single mother and respected professional. Marco, however, remained a storm cloud on the horizon of my newfound clarity. It wasn't long before I heard the familiar cadence of his voice echoing down the hallway as he approached. There was a frantic edge to it, a discordant note that betrayed his composure. His eyes found mine, widening with a mixture of shock and anger. "Where have you been? Where are the kids?" he demanded, his voice sharp, betraying his usual facade of control. Resisting the impulse to back away, I stood my ground. "They're safe," I replied evenly. "They're with my father." Marco's gaze darted around, taking in the faces of our colleagues who had formed an ad hoc audience to the unfolding drama. Isabel stepped forward, her presence a shield between the past and my future. "Welcome back, Elena," she declared with a smile, cutting through the tension. "We've all been looking forward to this day." The assembled coworkers erupted into applause, isolating Marco with their camaraderie. He seemed to shrink, a figure diminishing in the light of collective support. Confused yet defiant, he spluttered, "What is this about? Why didn't you tell me you were coming back?" "Isabel, with the poise of someone used to handling delicate situations, responded, "Our company is a family, Marco, and when a member of our family is ready to return, we celebrate." A murmur of agreement hummed through the crowd. I watched as understanding dawned upon Marco's face, the implications of my return, the shattering of the narrative he had constructed for himself. "The daycare," he finally stammered. "The children, they must be." I cut him off, my voice steady, my resolve unwavering. "The children are well taken care of. And as for the daycare, we've been fortunate enough to secure spots for both Gabriel and Sophia." Isabel supplemented my words, addressing Marco. "Indeed, they'll be just fine here. We've made certain of that with our new facility." The room buzzed with whispers of commendation and encouragement as Marco realized the breadth of his miscalculation. He had assumed I'd crumble without him, that I'd be forced to compromise. But as the walls he built around me fell away, his own began to close in. "Let's discuss this privately," Marco hissed, reaching for my arm. Resisting his touch, I produced the single item that symbolized the end of our union, a business card from a divorce attorney. His eyes flickered with defeat as I announced, "Please divorce me, Marco." Gasps and whispers filled the room, and I watched as the mask of charm Marco had always worn dissolved into a frown of disbelief. He was silent, searching for words that wouldn't come. Each heartbeat in the silence felt like an eternity, but ultimately it was Isabel's voice that filled the void. "Marco, I think it's time you and the higher-ups had a conversation." Humiliation flared across Marco's face as he backed away, realizing his private indiscretions were far less private than he had believed. As the weight of his deeds crept upon him, he slumped his shoulders, defeated and exposed. I turned away, leaving the broken vase of our marriage behind, and with it the shards of our tarnished past. The flicker of twilight's last stand gave way to night's embrace, as I sat in the quiet comfort of our new rental home, the twins sound asleep in their freshly assembled beds. It was incredible how silence had once been my enemy, filled with the tension of waiting for Marco's critique or outburst. Yet here it was now, a peaceful testament to the change I had courageously enacted. My phone's insistent ringtone splintered the calm. Marco's name flashed on the screen, a vestige of the life I was steadily discarding. With a calming breath I answered, bracing for the storm I knew I had stirred. "Elena, what have you done?" Marco's voice, barely intelligible between sobs and fury, crackled through the speaker. "I've started over, Marco, for myself and for our children," I replied, my voice a beacon in the tumult. He was in disbelief, reeling from the discovery of my actions, the sale of the house, the relocation of our family. The life he had taken for granted, dismantled, sold off to the highest bidder. My heart might have winced at his confusion once, but that empathy had dissolved with every disparaging remark, every angry shout, every tear shed in solitude because of him. "Our house, our home, it's empty. Where are Gabriel and Sophia and all our things?" He was frantic, grasping at the fragments of control that slipped through his fingers like fine sand. Calmness steadied my response. "It's all taken care of, Marco. The children are with my father, and our possessions are here with us in our new place." "You sold our house without my consent? Without even telling me?" His incredulity suggested betrayal, the irony stinging like salt in a wound. "I did what was necessary, Marco. The house was mine before we married. I used my savings for the down payment, remember?" I spoke the truth he could not refute, the reality he had ignored in favor of his self-centered narrative. "The real estate agent worked with us to find a buyer. It's done. We are moving on." He struggled for words, lost in the labyrinth of his making. When they finally came, they were edged with despair. "I thought we were going to discuss this, figure things out. There's nothing left to figure out. It's over, Marco." My finger hovered over the end call button, ready to sever the last of our ties. But where will I go?" he pleaded, the mighty Marco reduced to echoes of vulnerability. "That's for you to decide. Just know that Gabriel and Sophia will always be cared for, with or without you." The finality of my words seemed to drape over us, a curtain closing on the theater of our farce. I wasted no time after the call, swiftly blocking Marco's number, a line I never thought I'd cross. In the days that followed, legal motions unraveled the entanglements of our failed marriage. Custody, assets, child support. An avalanche of documents and signatures wiped clean the slate, giving rise to my long-awaited freedom. Rumors of his affair saw Marco ousted from his lofty perch, and without the shield of our company's prestige, he eventually resigned. Last I heard, his pride had surrendered to necessity, placing him in a humbler line of work. The whispers of his downfall weaved through the industry like a cautionary tale, a high price paid for hubris and betrayal. Before me lied the blank pages of our lives, ready to be filled with the tales of our choosing. A chapter closed, a book ended, and the narrative was mine to write anew. The morning sun painted hues of gold and amber across the sky, casting a warm glow over the breakfast table where Gabriel and Sophia munched on their cereal with eagerness which only children possess. The atmosphere was serene, a stark contrast to the vortex of recent events. As we sat around the table, my father, the twins, and I formed a new picture, a frame of family redefined by solidarity and love. Those early days of our new life felt like living in a dream, one where I half expected to wake to the sound of Marco's voice demanding an explanation, but that never happened. The twins adapted with the resilience of youth, and over time, peace became our new normal. The transition back into work was smooth, even liberating. Colleagues who had once pitied me now greeted me with respect. My input was once again valued, my insights sought after, and my presence acknowledged. Isabel had checked in often, ensuring that the integration was seamless and that I settled into the rhythm easily. The on-site daycare was a godsend, offering not just convenience but a level of care and attention that left me reassured during the workday. As the days eased into weeks and the weeks meshed into months, we settled into a comfortable routine. Life without Marco's overbearing presence transformed from an initial breath-holding suspense into a deep, gratifying exhale. The fear of his volatility and the anxiety over our future had dissolved into a renewed sense of purpose and independence. Catherine had been true to her word. The whole office seemed to rally around me. Some came by just to tell me how they admired my strength. Others gently shared their own stories of overcoming difficulties. The solidarity was unexpected but deeply appreciated. Even the higher-ups, who were initially guarded, offered their unofficial nods of approval and encouragement. Of course, there were challenges. The twins, with their boundless energy and ceaseless curiosity, ensured there was never a dull moment. The balance between work, motherhood, and personal growth was a delicate dance, but one I was determined to master. Every step I took with a clarity I had not felt in years. I took my father's advice to remain involved with the community to heart. Being active in local events, meeting neighbors, and contributing to the twins' daycare activities provided a sense of belonging. In the shared experiences of parenting and bits of leisurely chats by the playground, I found companionship and a thread of connection weaving into the fabric of our new lives. Gabriel and Sophia burgeoned in this new environment, their laughter a confirmation that leaving Marco had been the right decision. When they hugged me tightly with tiny arms that promised eternity, I knew we had a bright future ahead. All things considered, the upheaval had led to a life more vibrant and fulfilling than I dared to imagine when trapped beneath Marco's shadow. My parents had instilled in me the values of strength, optimism, and resilience, qualities I aimed to pass on to my children. Looking ahead, I saw more than just a flickering light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I saw brilliant sunshine painting our path forward. As I turned the key in the door of our new home, it was more than just an entranceway. It was a gateway to the promise of tomorrow. And with one last glance back at the road traveled and the traces of the struggle behind us, I stepped through with my head held high, ready for whatever awaited us on the other side.
Naturally, I inquired why he had made a family card of his in-laws, as well, to which James chuckled and replied, "Because they are my family." "They must have one family card, right?" "Got a problem with that," he added. "You wouldn't have anything to say if you knew who helped you when no one was there." His strong tone took me off guard, and I had never heard that from him. Was James always like this? He said, "If you are grateful, then do better with my family. Then you will be family to me. In a sense, you are in some kind of trial period until then." I had never heard of a trial period in marriage. James went on, seeing I was quiet. "In other words, you're not fully part of the family yet. If you don't like it, you can leave any time. For now, our family is just the 6 of us. I was shocked. After that, I immediately canceled all our joint credit cards and moved out. My name is Polly Cook, 30 years old. I'm a freelance illustrator. I used to work as a designer for a big advertising agency, but started on my own 5 years ago when I got married. Now I work from home. My parents died in an accident when I was young. I was raised by my maternal grandparents, but moved back to my parents' apartment near the city center for college. I've been living there ever since. I met my husband James at an Italian restaurant where he worked. It was a nice place with reasonable prices and good food, so my colleagues and I often went there. That's when James, the handsome waiter, became a topic of conversation. Indeed, he was good-looking. The manager once joked that a lot of the regulars came just to see James, and I could see why. I won't deny that I became one of James's fans because I thought he was really cool. He really stood out for some reason. We quickly became closer, and soon people were calling us a couple. Surprisingly, we ended up getting married. I don't remember much about that time. It's almost like I was in a daze. When I snapped out of it, I was married to a man I was calling my husband. But I loved James then and was happy when we got married. I quit my job as a designer at the company and started working independently. It was a friendly departure, and I continued the same kind of work, but on my own. James kept his job at the Italian restaurant, working different hours, sometimes late into the night. It became hard to work as usual, and I had always wanted to work independently, so I decided to go for it. It's a good idea, Polly. It'll be easier for you, and it's great to keep doing what you love. James supported my decision. That's how our life as newlyweds began. We both didn't care for flashy things, so we decided not to have a wedding ceremony and just officially registered our marriage. We met each other's families briefly, and that was it. James went to work, and I worked from home and did the household chores. Our schedules were irregular, but we kept in touch and waited to have meals together when we were both home. It was a happy, simple life, and I thought, marriage is nice. But about a year after we got married, everything fell apart. My family wants to come over. Is that okay? James asked one day. Of course, I said it was fine. I had only met and briefly talked to James's family at our initial meeting, so I thought this was a good chance to get to know them better. Having lost my parents at a young age, I always admired James's large family. But when his family of 5 arrived, I was left speechless. Hey, which room is mine? His sister asked as soon as she walked into our house. James's sister, who is 35 years old and 3 years older than both James and me, worked at a local supermarket. I was shocked by her rude behavior, so different from the polite greeting she gave me when we first met. James's 22-year-old sister was also there, but she was quiet and just stood there without saying a word. I remember she barely spoke when we first met. Hurried by James's sister, I showed the 2 sisters to the guest room and James's parents to the room that used to be my parents' room. It was the only Japanese-style room in the apartment, so I thought it would be best for them. After settling into their rooms, James's sister announced, "Well, since we're going to be living here together, you better start serving our family properly." I was confused by what she meant, but when I looked at James for help, he just laughed in a way I had never seen before. It turned out his family had given up their own home and moved into my apartment without telling me. Sorry, our family home suddenly had to be vacated, and they had nowhere to go, he explained. I wish he had told me earlier. I had thought it was just for a day or 3, and this was really inconvenient. When I mentioned this to James, trying not to upset him, he looked down and apologized. Please, just until they find somewhere else to go, he pleaded. I couldn't say no. How could I turn away people in need, especially the family of someone important to me, without even a place to go? I reluctantly agreed to live together on the condition that they find a new place as soon as possible. But I would come to regret this decision. James's family showed no restraint. All four of them, from the day they moved in, did nothing and left everything to me, saying whatever they wanted. They made no effort to look for a house or a job. When I asked about their jobs, I was in for another surprise. "Oh, I quit that lousy supermarket job," she had said. She was employed, but apparently it was just part-time work. I had thought she worked full-time because of her age, but she told me she hadn't had a steady job since high school. James's parents also had part-time jobs, which they quit before coming here. And of course, James's other sister was unemployed. She had claimed she was a student, but that was not true. "Why should I work when I've become part of a wealthy family?" she asked. When I asked who she was talking about, I got another shocking reply. "You, of course. You got a big settlement and insurance money from your parents' accident, and you don't even have a mortgage on this apartment. You can live without working," James's sister said, laughing. I complained to James when he got home, but he yelled in a way I had never seen before. Everyone's tired from suddenly having to leave their home. Let them rest for a while, or do you want to kick out my family, Polly? Stunned, I froze. Then James suddenly softened his tone. "Sorry for yelling. I'm having a tough day too. Can you just be a little more patient?" Looking back, James was skilled at manipulating situations with a mix of kindness and harshness. But at that moment, I didn't see it and agreed to endure a bit longer. The tyranny of James's family got worse. They treated me like a servant at home and demanded money when going out. "We can't job hunt without a penny, can we?" "It's fine, but if we can't find work, we'll just keep living here," they said. I reluctantly gave them some money, which they claimed to have spent without finding jobs. They probably never looked for work, but if I said that, they would accuse me of lying without proof, and James's whole family would blame me for hours. Telling James didn't solve the problem. Everyone's frustrated about not finding jobs. "Sorry, just bear with it a little longer." "I'll talk to them," James said, trying to smooth things over. But as time went on, I felt like saying anything was pointless. However, the frequency of them asking for money gradually decreased, perhaps because James said something, so the issue seemed to resolve itself. Of course, the money I had given them was never returned. Then after about 2 months of living this way, I noticed something alarming. Why is the credit card bill so high? Could it be unauthorized use? When I quickly checked the credit card statement, all the charges were made with family credit cards. The purchases included food, drinks, books, games, and even expensive brand bags and clothes. Each item was labeled with a number from 1 to 6, showing that 6 family credit cards had been issued. These credit cards were in my name, with James using the family cards. "It seems like you'd be better at handling this, and it's more convenient to consolidate payments, right? Can I leave it to you?" He had said, and I ended up managing them. But it turned out these family cards had been issued without me knowing. James's family stopped asking for money because they could now make credit card payments and cash withdrawals. When I confronted James about why he made family cards for his in-laws without asking me, he laughed and said, "Well, you complain when they say they have no money, so what choice do I have? Besides, you know who took you in when you were all alone, right? Can you really say such things to the important family of your benefactor?" I was stunned into silence by his bold tone, unlike anything I had heard before. Was James always like this? "If you're grateful, you should serve my family more. Then I'll acknowledge you as family too. Until then, consider it like you're on a trial period," he continued. I had never heard of a trial period in marriage. Seeing my silence, James pressed further. This means you're not yet an official family member. If you don't like it, you can leave any time. Right now, it's just the 5 of us in our family. Useless parasites get out. That's when I realized James's true nature. I felt as if all the blood had drained from my body. Shocked, I considered divorcing James. In fact, I began to wonder why I had married James in the first place. Initially, I just thought he was a handsome guy. Like the other girls, I was just excited about him being handsome without any particular reason. Then one time, when I went to the restroom, James approached me. "You seem different from other people, Polly." I don't know, kind of mystical. Sorry, it's not something I should say to a customer. I was surprised but kept listening, and I gradually started to pay more attention to James. Maybe that was his plan, to make me like him. When I think about it calmly, it makes sense. I remember once when James came to our table for small talk, a colleague jokingly said I was a wealthy lady living alone in a condo. It was right after that he started talking to me, probably because he was interested in my wealth and the condo. Honestly, James wasn't really my type. To put it nicely, he was modern. To put it bluntly, he seemed a bit frivolous. I liked mature men who spoke quietly and seriously. But somehow, I ended up falling for James. I always found that strange since James was the typical handsome guy, and it must have been easy for him to charm a woman, especially someone like me who was new to the workforce and not used to men. I fell for his tactics and ended up marrying him. This thought made me feel so frustrated and embarrassed. I felt like destroying everything in the house, but I wasn't foolish enough to act on that impulse. Instead, I decided to get revenge. To do that, I needed to endure this life a little longer, just like James manipulated me. I planned to control his entire family. The condo we live in was bought by my father with a mortgage soon after I was born. It wasn't very expensive back then, but the area developed rapidly with a new shopping center nearby, and now it's considered a luxury condo. My parents, hoping for more children, bought a spacious condo. That's why there's enough room even with James's family moving in. But even with its decent size, having James's family around is a nuisance for me, especially working from home. I'm enduring this only for the sake of revenge. As James' sister said, there's no mortgage payment for this condo. When I was 4, both of my parents died in a car accident. They were coming back from my paternal grandfather's funeral when they collided with a speeding car on the freeway. That day, I was supposed to go with my parents, but I caught the flu that's going around and had a high fever. So my maternal grandparents came to the condo where we lived with my parents to take care of me, leaving me as the only one who survived. The mortgage payments were covered by the group credit life insurance, so the only housing costs I pay are the management fees and property taxes. James, seeing the amount, said he would contribute just a bit more than that to our household expenses. There's no mortgage, so if I put in that much, we should manage with Polly's income, right? We'll each use our own earnings for personal expenses. Sounds good, doesn't it? I agreed, thinking maybe he was right. Until then, I had been paying for everything by myself, so I thought his contribution would lighten my load. Looking back, it was foolish, but at the time, I was blinded by my love for James and just went along with whatever he said. James probably thinks he's the head of the household and the one supporting me, which is why he can so easily call me a parasite. But in reality, it's different. I pay for most of the expenses like utilities, food, social expenses, and entertainment. Now 5 real parasites had been added to my household, making it impossible to manage with just that amount. I wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible, but I pretended not to notice and endured. I gritted my teeth and let James's family freely shop, reminding myself that I'll be the one laughing in the end. Then 5 months after deciding to divorce, the date of act finally came. I'm tired. Please decide. It's either me or your family, I told James, presenting him with a final decision. He was surprised, but I continued without concern. None of your family members lift a finger to help around the house. They just dump all their chores on me. You know I work from home. I'm not just playing around. Yet they treat me like a freeloader and tell me to know my place since you're supporting me. I've had enough, I cried. I confronted James. He smirked at me and said, "Then you should leave." Didn't I tell you before? You're not really part of this family yet. Giving up like this means you didn't earn your place in the family. I acted shocked as I looked at him. What are you surprised about? If you can't live with my family, then you're the one who has to leave. Oh, and since I'm not at fault, I'll take this apartment as alimony, and I'll take half of your savings as part of the property division. Ah, so that was his plan all along. That's why his whole family kept harassing me, trying to drive me out. I knew it, but hearing it said outright was still a shock. It was someone I once loved and even married. But thanks to this, I made up my mind. Fine, I said, deciding to divorce James. But this condo is mine, and I'm not at fault either. What did you say? James seemed shocked that I outright rejected his proposal, not expecting such a response. It made sense as I had always complied with his demands since our marriage. Thinking back on it made me angry. I don't want to spend another second with you all, so I'll leave now, but you should also prepare to leave. It's a joke, right? This is our home. We won't leave. Ever heard of residential rights? You can't just force people out who live here, James shouted. Ignoring his ranting, I left the house and went to my grandparents' place. I explained everything and asked if I could stay until things were settled. My grandparents were shocked to learn what I had gone through and scolded me for not consulting them earlier. With tears in their eyes, I apologized. "Grandma, Grandpa, I'm sorry for worrying you, but I'll be okay now." "I look fragile, but I'm not really," I said, forcing a laugh with tears in my eyes. The day after I left the apartment, James contacted me right away. "Hey, what's this all about?" "What are you referring to?" I asked about the certified mail. I was impressed by how quickly things were moving. I had handed the divorce proceedings over to a lawyer, and when I told them yesterday that I was leaving the house, they arranged for everything to be sorted out today. "I'm not paying any alimony, and I'm not leaving the condo," James declared. But legally, he had an obligation to pay, and he didn't have the right to continue living in that apartment. "What are you talking about? That apartment is mine too since we're married. If you insist, then pay me half its value to buy me out," he said. Such an absurd claim. Talking like this is getting us nowhere. "Please communicate through my lawyer from now on," I said, ending the call. I knew he would probably call again tomorrow, but I had no desire to talk anymore that day. As expected, he called the next morning. "Hey, what's this all about?" He repeated the same line as yesterday, showing no creativity. "What are you referring to?" "The card's not working. What did you do?" "What I did was cancel it. That card was mine, and you were just using the family card, remember?" Indeed, before leaving the house, I had switched all the contracts from that card to another and canceled it. Of course, the family cards would stop working when I canceled mine. I was the one paying for it. Yes, you paid the apartment's management fee and property taxes just for the first 4 months. It's not much, but I can deduct that from the alimony if you like. I mocked him. I heard some indistinct shouting from the other end of the phone. That's right. James only paid the agreed amount for just 4 months. He made various excuses about the store and whatnot, always finding a reason to ask me to wait. But then he stopped paying altogether. If he forgot and thought he was still paying, that's some poor memory. But I didn't care anymore. He's someone I'm cutting ties with. His memory doesn't matter to me. That's the situation, so please pay your half of the living expenses I've been covering. I've kept a detailed record of our household expenses, which I'll use as evidence to fairly divide our savings. It's marital property, he demanded. Yes, I understand. Let's split it accordingly, I agreed. He ended the call with a reminder not to forget. A few days later, I got another call from him using the same line. I realized they lacked not only memory, but also vocabulary. What do you mean by the split of shared property? Why is it zero? You must be rolling in cash from your parents' insurance and alimony, he said. Ah, so that's what they were thinking. I patiently explained that my savings before marriage weren't part of the shared property, and since we had no savings after marriage, it naturally amounted to zero. Don't lie to me. If you think I'm lying, why don't you consult with someone? From now on, please communicate through my attorney. I won't be speaking to you directly anymore. Goodbye, I said, then hung up the phone and blocked James's number. 1 month after I left the house, James and his family finally moved out of the apartment. Not because they had a change of heart, but because they couldn't sustain their lifestyle. Naturally, James's income alone wasn't enough for a family of 5. They were used to shopping extravagantly with my card. Telling them to cut back now was impossible. I had let them use the card intentionally, knowing it would come to this. His family started pestering James for shopping money, and when he refused, they began stealing from his wallet. Even when James got angry, they blamed him for kicking me out. To top it off, the electricity, gas, and water were all shut off. Of course, I had arranged for that since I didn't plan to live there for a while. James tried to get the utilities restored immediately by phone, but the house was in my name, so no one else could reconnect them if the owner had stopped them. During the hot summer and early fall, his family couldn't handle the extreme heat and eventually left the condo. Where they went, I neither know nor care. James tried to stay until the end, but he eventually gave up because there was no electricity and he couldn't bathe. The divorce proceedings went faster than expected, not because James had a change of heart, but because he made mistakes. He cheated on me while we were still married, or rather he started making moves on someone thinking he could kick me out soon. He boasted about owning a luxury apartment in a prime location downtown, using it to attract young girls. It's surprising he did this while his family was around, but he had a history of such behavior, so they didn't mind. Before leaving, I had installed cameras in several places in the house, which captured all the evidence. Maybe he underestimated me, but he really did disrespect me. He brought his family into my home without my permission, made a family card, left me the bill, kicked me out, and cheated on me. I demanded a hefty sum in alimony for all these. When James saw the amount, he turned pale and desperately pleaded for reconciliation. But I had no such intentions. Knowing he couldn't pay, I made him borrow as much as possible from his company and took whatever I could get. When I threatened to sue him for fraud over the family card, he reluctantly agreed to my terms. Well, I hope he does his best to pay off his debt. The divorce is finalized, and I'm still staying at my grandparents' place. I haven't decided what to do with the apartment yet. I might sell it. I treasured it because my parents left it to me, but since they passed away when I was very young, and I have no memories of them, plus all this has happened, I think they'd understand if I let it go. My work as an illustrator is picking up. I might live alone again, but it's a good time for that. I can work just fine staying at my grandparents'. I'll depend on them a little longer, then move forward with strength. Next time, I won't be fooled by a man who's only good-looking. I hope to find a partner I can share my life with.
Nestled on the outskirts of a vast city, our house was the scene of a normal Thursday evening. After a tiring day at his auto repair shop, Tom would usually have a beer and relax on the couch, while I, Sandra, would keep my eyes fixed on my laptop to stay up to date on the newest cryptocurrency and stock trends. Our modest two-story house, which we chose because it offered the prospect of a future and a family, now felt more like a battlefield for our increasingly different lifestyles. So, what was today's market like? Tom asked in a casual tone, but I could feel the tension behind. It's now the standard for us, the same ups and downs as usual. Attempting to maintain composure, I responded, "Crypto looks good, though." Tom scoffed and threw down his beer a bit too forcefully. "Crypto once more. You are aware that not everything shiny is valuable." With a sigh, I closed my laptop and prepared myself for the dialogue we'd had 1,000 times over. Even though you can't fix every automobile that comes into your business, you nevertheless choose to fix it because you think it has value. How come you don't think my work is valuable? Because automobiles exist, Sandra. You are able to handle, repair, and sell them. It's just reckless what you're doing, throwing our money to the wind in the hopes that it will come back with more. I felt the anger bubble up. It's not reckless, Tom. It's calculated. There's a difference between gambling and investing. I wish you'd try to understand that. Tom stood up, pacing now. Calculated? You call putting our hard-earned money into something as volatile as cryptocurrency calculated? Yes, I do, because I don't go in blind. I research, I study trends, I make informed decisions. It's no different from what you do with your shop. My shop is a sure thing, Sandra. People always need car repairs. But this is just a phase. What happens when it crashes, huh? What then? We could lose money in any investment, Tom. The shop could falter. Nothing's guaranteed, but we've seen good returns on my investments. Isn't that worth something? Tom stopped pacing, running a hand through his hair in frustration. It's not just about the money, Sandra. It's about security, about not risking everything on a damn coin flip. Why can't we invest more in the shop, expand it? That's a real, tangible way to grow our money. Put all our eggs in one basket. What if something happens to the shop? Tom, diversification is key. That's investing 101. He shook his head, the gap between our perspectives as vast as ever. Diversification, sure, but into something stable, not this digital fairy dust. I stood up, now feeling the need to defend my choices, my independence. You know, for someone who runs his own business, you're surprisingly close-minded. And you're surprisingly stubborn, he shot back. All I'm saying is we could be using that money to build something lasting, something we can see and touch, not just numbers on a screen. The conversation was going nowhere, as usual. Let's just agree to disagree, okay? I won't criticize how you run your shop, and you don't criticize my investments. Tom sighed, the fight draining from him. Fine. But just remember, Sandra, when all this blows up in your face, don't say I didn't warn you. The tension between Tom and me wasn't the only strain in our lives. His family dynamics added another layer of complexity. Living close to his parents and sister meant frequent interactions, each one a reminder of our different views on family and responsibility. It was a Sunday afternoon when Tom suggested we visit his parents. The idea alone made my stomach knot. It wasn't the parents I minded, it was Sarah, Tom's sister. Her lifestyle and choices were a constant source of bewilderment to me. Come on, Sandra, it's been ages since we've seen them, and Mom's been asking about you and more. You know Dad is fighting cancer, Tom pressed, noticing my hesitation. Yeah, I bet Sarah's missed me too, I muttered, my sarcasm not lost on Tom. Look, I know you two don't see eye to eye, but can't you just, I don't know, try for me? Sighing, I agreed. Fine, but I'm not staying if she starts on one of her shopping spree stories. We arrived to find Sarah already there, flaunting her latest designer bag. The air of superiority she carried like a perfume instantly grated on me. Look at this. Just got it yesterday. Isn't it just fabulous? She gushed, barely acknowledging our presence. It's something, I managed to say, biting my tongue. Tom's mother, oblivious to the tension, ushered us in. Sandra, dear, so glad you could make it. You two should visit more often. The afternoon dragged on, with Sarah dominating the conversation, recounting her latest vacation and shopping exploits. I tried to keep a neutral face, engaging in minimal conversation, but my patience was wearing thin. So, Sandra, still playing with your stocks and bits? Sarah sneered, her tone dripping with disdain. It's called investing, Sarah. You should try it sometime instead of blowing through money on things you don't need. I shot back, my annoyance breaking through. Tom shot me a warning look, but it was too late. Sarah scoffed. Investing? Please, like gambling on the internet is anything to brag about. At least when I spend my money, I have something to show for it. Something to show until it goes out of fashion next season, I retorted, unable to help myself. That's enough, both of you, Tom's father interjected, his tone stern. We're here to enjoy each other's company, not to argue about whatever this is. The rest of the visit passed in uncomfortable silence. As we left, Tom couldn't hold back his frustration. Sandra, why do you have to provoke her? Can't you just let it go for one afternoon? Me provoke her. She's the one who started it with her snide remarks. I'm just not going to sit there and take it. Tom, it's just sometimes I wish you'd try a little harder for the sake of peace. Try harder? I'm not the one splurging on luxuries and then flaunting them in everyone's face. Why doesn't anyone tell her to stop acting like a spoiled brat? Because she's family, Sandra. We look out for each other, even if we don't always agree with what they're doing. That's just it, Tom. Looking out for each other is one thing, but enabling bad behavior is another. There's a difference, and it's about time someone pointed it out to her. Tom sighed, the weariness evident in his voice. I know, but what can we do? She's set in her ways, and Mom and Dad aren't going to change how they treat her. It's not just about Sarah, Tom. It's about us too. How are we supposed to plan for our future when there's always going to be this financial black hole in your family? We'll figure it out, Sandra. We always do. The news hit us hard and fast. Tom's dad, Mr. Harrison, had lost his battle with cancer. It felt like one moment we were discussing treatment options, and the next we were plunged into mourning. Amidst the shock and grief, Sarah, Tom's sister, took charge of the funeral arrangements. It wasn't long before she dropped a bombshell on us about the cost. Sitting in our living room, looking like a storm cloud had settled over his head, Tom relayed what Sarah had told him. Sandra, Sarah says the funeral's going to cost $60,000. She's expecting us to chip in half. I nearly choked on my tea. $60,000, Tom. That's insane. Are we funding a funeral or a royal wedding here? Tom's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. Now's not the time, Sandra. This isn't about the money. It's about giving my dad the send-off he deserves. But $60,000, there has to be a mistake. It's too much. Tom's voice rose, and I could see the vein in his forehead starting to pulse. My dad has just died, Sandra, and here you are haggling over pennies. What's wrong with you? I flinched at his harshness. I'm not haggling, Tom. I'm just shocked. We never even spent that kind of money on our own house. Tom stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what? I don't need this. I don't need you telling me what's too much for my own father's funeral. If you can't see past your Dan spreadsheets for once, maybe you should just stay out of it. The hurt from his words cut deep, but I swallowed my retort. This was grief talking, not my Tom. "I'm sorry, Tom. I'll transfer the $30,000 to Sarah. It's just, this is a lot to process." Tom paced the room, hands buried in his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd come to recognize over the years. "Yeah, well, it's not just about the money, Sandra. It's about doing right by him. And if that means paying whatever it costs, then so be it." When I confirmed the transfer to Sarah, Tom barely acknowledged it, lost in his own world of grief and anger. The distance between us felt like miles, not the few feet of our living room. Walking into the funeral agency, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. The last few days had been a blur of grief and confusion, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to learn. "I'm here for Mr. Harrison's funeral," I announced to the woman behind the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up from her computer, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're a day late. Mr. Harrison was cremated yesterday." My heart stopped. "What? But how? I was told the funeral was today." She shook her head gently, her eyes full of sympathy. "The family requested to move the date forward. I'm very sorry for your loss and the confusion." I stood there, dumbfounded, my mind racing. How could Tom not tell me? Why was I left in the dark about such a significant change? Fuming, I dialed Tom's number, my fingers shaking with anger and disbelief. "Tom, why the hell didn't you tell me the funeral was moved? I just showed up like an idiot, only to find out I missed everything." Tom's voice was cold and detached. "Because I didn't think you cared, Sandra. All you've done is complain about the costs and question every decision. Why would I think you'd want to be there? Because he was my father-in-law. Because I'm your wife. How could you just exclude me like that?" My voice cracked, a mixture of hurt and fury. Well, maybe not for long. "What's that supposed to mean?" I demanded, my heart sinking. "I'm done, Sandra. I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who is so indifferent. You're more concerned with your bitcoins and shares than with this family. I've got the divorce papers ready." His words were like a slap in the face. Divorce? Was he serious? "You're kidding, right? Over this?" "Tom, we can talk about it. We can work things out." "No, Sandra. It's too late. The house is going up for sale. We'll split everything and go our separate ways." That's it? I was speechless, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Stunned, I wandered back to the parking lot, where I saw Sarah pulling in, driving a brand-new luxury car. The sight of it made my blood boil. "Nice car, Sarah. Where'd you get the money for this?" "Inheritance," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes as she tossed her hair back. "Yeah, something like that. Dad left me a little something." The casual way she mentioned her father, with shopping bags in her hands and not a trace of sadness on her face, was infuriating. "A little something, huh? Looks like mourning is treating you pretty well." Sarah's smile faded, replaced by a smirk. "Well, we all grieve in our own ways, don't we? Some of us invest in stocks, and some of us in cars." I clenched my fists. The injustice of it all burned inside me. This was all wrong. Tom and I were falling apart, and here was Sarah benefiting from the chaos. "Enjoy the car, Sarah. Looks like it cost a pretty penny, or should I say a pretty dollar." She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty parking lot. "Oh, Sandra, always so concerned about the money. Don't worry, it's all been taken care of." I watched her walk away, her laughter lingering in the air. The man I loved wanted nothing to do with me, and the family I had tried to be a part of was showing their true colors. The days following the funeral felt like navigating through a thick fog of disbelief and betrayal. The weight of the divorce papers in my bag felt like carrying a boulder, a constant reminder of my crumbling marriage. But the sight of Sarah's new luxury car planted a seed of suspicion that I couldn't shake off. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to pay a visit to the funeral home, hoping to uncover some answers. Walking into the funeral home, a mix of suspicion and determination fueled my steps. It felt surreal being here under these circumstances, but I needed answers. The place was quiet, the air filled with a solemnity fitting its purpose. At the reception, I recognized a face from the past. Jackie, a classmate from high school who'd ended up in the most unexpected of places. Jackie. I exclaimed a bit too loudly for the setting. I didn't know you worked here. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face before recognition set in. Sandra. Wow, it's been ages. What brings you here? Something I can help with. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. Yeah, actually, it's about my father-in-law's funeral. I heard it was arranged here. Jackie's expression turned professional, but there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Sure, let me pull up the details. Give me a sec. As she typed away, I fidgeted, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The moment she found the record, her brows furrowed. Okay, here it is. The service was pretty standard. Cremation was requested, keeping things on the simpler side. The total came to $5,000. My heart sank. $5,000? But that's not what we were told. We paid $60,000, or at least we were led to believe that's what it cost. Jackie paused, her face a mask of concern. That's a huge difference. It was Sarah who handled the arrangements, right? Everything here was billed at $5,000, no more. The pieces were starting to fit together, a picture I didn't want to see. Can you print me a copy of that bill? I need proof. Sure thing, Jackie said, her tone sympathetic. She quickly printed out a duplicate of the check and handed it to me. Holding the paper, it felt like a piece of a puzzle that would unravel a bigger deception. Thanks, Jackie. I've got to sort this out. Armed with the printout from the funeral home, my next stop was confronting the family, particularly Sarah. The air felt heavy as I drove to my mother-in-law's house, where I knew they'd all be gathered, probably discussing the estate and the aftermath of the funeral. My stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. I hesitated at the door, gathering my courage before stepping inside. The sound of my footsteps seemed to echo through the hallway, announcing my arrival. In the living room, Tom, Sarah, and my mother-in-law were seated, looking like a picture of mourning that was about to be shattered. My mother-in-law, her eyes shadowed with grief, broke the silence first. "Dear, we missed you yesterday at the funeral. We thought you'd be there." Taking a deep breath, I replied, "I was told it was today. I'm so sorry for your loss." My voice was steady despite the churn of emotions inside me. I then turned to Tom. "Can we talk in private?" I hoped to spare his mother any more distress. Tom's response cut through the room. "No secrets here. You're not part of this family anymore." His words stung, but I pushed on, pulling up the check from the funeral home. "Then explain this to me. The funeral cost $5,000, not the $60,000 Sarah claimed. Where did the rest go?" Tom looked genuinely shocked, turning to Sarah with a bewildered, "What's this about?" Sarah squirmed under our gazes. I needed the money," she finally admitted, her voice small. The revelation seemed to hang in the air until Tom's mom, overhearing, added, "Your father saved for his own farewell. I even gave Sarah $10,000 more to cover everything." I did the math out loud, tension rising. $70,000 in total, and only $5,000 spent. "Sarah, where's the rest?" Flustered, Sarah confessed to splurging the money on a new car for herself, her gaze darting away, unable to meet mine. I expected Tom to explode, but instead he almost tenderly told Sarah, "You shouldn't have done that. Be more careful next time." His response floored me. "Careful? She committed fraud, Tom, and you're okay with that." Tom's justification left me reeling. "You wouldn't understand. You've got no family. You don't get what it means to stick together." That was the last straw. In front of them all, I signed the divorce papers with a flourish. "Sarah, you owe me $30,000. Pay up or I'm going to the police." Tom's protests followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. I'd seen enough, heard enough. The betrayal was complete, and so was my resolve. As I walked away, the finality of my action settled in. There was no going back, only forward from here, away from the lies and the deceit that had marred what I once thought of as family. Packing up my life into boxes felt surreal, like I was an observer in my own story. The "for sale" sign outside the house was a stark reminder of the finality of it all. By afternoon, I was settling into a small apartment that felt more like a fresh start than a downgrade. That evening, as I was sorting through the remnants of my past life, my phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen, a name I no longer felt attached to. I answered, curiosity edging out resentment. "Sandra, you need to back off Sarah." Tom's voice came through, tinged with an uncharacteristic harshness. "Back off?" I laughed, cold and sharp. "Not a chance, Tom. She took from me and I want it back. Your sister is a thief." Tom was silent for a moment. "She's family. You wouldn't understand." "Family?" I scoffed. "That ship has sailed, Tom. As far as I'm concerned, you and your sister are just people I used to know." He tried to argue, but I cut him off. "Save it. Sarah has 2 weeks to return my money, or I'm pressing charges, and you stay out of it. You're nothing to me now." Hanging up, I felt a mix of sadness and liberation. The man I once loved was now just another obstacle in my path to reclaiming my life. 2 weeks later, a knock at my door heralded the return of my $30,000. Sarah stood there, her posture defiant, a smirk playing on her lips. "Here's your money," she spat, thrusting an envelope into my hands. "Happy now, you money-grubbing witch." I took the envelope, my gaze steady. "It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about principle, about not letting you walk all over people." She laughed, hollow and bitter. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." As she turned to leave, I called out, "Just remember, Sarah, karma's a real pain. What goes around comes around." Closing the door, I leaned against it, the envelope heavy in my hand. The money was a small victory, but the real win was standing up for myself, refusing to be a victim of their greed and lies. Life had found a new rhythm, calmer and more predictable. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang, displaying a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Tom, a voice from a past I had neatly folded away. "Hey, I need a favor." "A big one." Tom's voice sounded more worn than I remembered. I paused, the suddenness of the call throwing me. "A favor?" "Tom, we're past favors, don't you think?" "It's Sarah. She's in deep this time. Dead's up to her eyeballs, and the wolves are at the door. We've sold everything. The house, the shop. It's still not enough." His words took a moment to sink in. "And you're calling me why? I'm not part of the circus anymore, Tom." He sighed, a sound of desperation. "Come on, don't be like that. You got out, made it big with your trading. Can't you spare something for old time's sake?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, he still saw me as a lifeline for their mess. Spare something for her after she nearly ruined us with her lies? You've got some nerve, Tom. "It's not just for her. It's for all of us. You wouldn't be where you are without me. Don't forget that." He responded, a hint of resentment in his voice. I let out a short, piercing laugh. "You're not the reason I am where I am. I am despite you. Do you believe I owe you anything? That is quite wealthy." The line was silent, a heavy, uneasy quiet. "That's it then. Are you planning to abandon us?" "We, Tom, we do not exist. It has been a while since there was. Regarding turning my back, I believe you have misinterpreted me for someone who is still compassionate." As I hung up, I had a range of feelings, including relief and fury. That was really the end of that chapter in my life. I was struck by how far I had come as I sat in the living room of my new home, which I had acquired with hard work and intelligence. This was my haven, constructed not on the precarious foundation of lying and manipulation, but rather on my perseverance and diligence.
It's funny how life can change in the blink of an eye. I'm Megan, and as I sit here reflecting on everything that's happened, I'm reminded of how quickly things can unravel. I'm in my early 30s now, living a simple life in a small town near Portland, Oregon. It's a peaceful place where everyone knows each other and the pace of life is slow. I used to think this was all I needed until I met Ryan. It all started at a cozy cafe just a few blocks from my apartment. I was there, sipping my coffee and trying to finish a book when he walked in. Ryan was charming in that effortless way people can be. Early 30s, with a warm smile and an easy confidence that drew people in. He seemed perfect, or at least perfect for me at that moment. We struck up a conversation about the book I was reading, and before long, we were meeting for coffee regularly. It wasn't long before our meetings turned into something more serious. We had so much in common, and it felt like we were two pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Our relationship grew quickly. We bonded over shared interests, and our discussions soon turned to marriage. Ryan worked in an office job, and though my own occupation wasn't specifically mentioned, I valued my independence and self-respect deeply. I had always been proud of standing on my own 2 feet, and Ryan seemed to appreciate that about me. But as they say, the honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. It was when I met Ryan's parents that things began to shift. His mother, Karen, was in her late 60s and came across as the type who was used to getting her way. From the moment we were introduced, it was clear she had strong opinions about everything. She was overbearing and manipulative, a real piece of work. I tried my best to make a good impression, but it didn't take long for me to realize that Karen wasn't fond of me. Karen had a controlling nature and an unyielding grip on Ryan. She was obsessed with maintaining control over him and, of course, protecting the family wealth. During one of our meetings, she insisted that we sign a prenuptial agreement before we could even think about marriage. Ryan and I discussed it, and although I was hesitant, I agreed. The prenuptial agreement had a clause that stipulated if either of us cheated, the offending partner would have to pay $70,000. I was willing to accept this to make Ryan and Karen happy, even though the idea of it left a bad taste in my mouth. Little did I know, this agreement was just the beginning of the problems to come. As Ryan and I settled into our life together, Karen's interference only grew worse. She focused relentlessly on our struggles to conceive a child. Her constant criticism wore me down and began to erode my self-esteem. It felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't escape her harsh judgment. Ryan, unfortunately, didn't stand up for me. He seemed to let Karen's opinions dictate our lives, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated. I had never felt so alone in a relationship before. My self-respect was slipping away, and I started to question my place in Ryan's life. The tipping point came when I began to notice changes in Ryan's behavior. He started taking late-night work calls and paying more attention to his appearance, which struck me as odd. My suspicions grew, and I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my gut. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It was a desperate measure, but I needed to know the truth. The investigator's report was devastating. Ryan was having an affair. I felt shattered. But instead of confronting him right away, I decided to keep the information to myself and plan my next move carefully. I was determined not to let Ryan or Karen see me as a pushover. It wasn't just Ryan's betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that Karen was part of this betrayal too. I overheard a conversation between them one evening, and it was like a punch to the gut. They were discussing how they could use me to fund an expensive birthday gift for Karen and then discard me. I was nothing more than a pawn in their scheme. That's when I knew I had to take control of the situation. So, I started making my plans. I knew that if I wanted to get out of this mess and come out on top, I needed to be strategic. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't going to let Ryan and Karen get away with treating me like this. Little did they know, their actions had set the stage for a dramatic turn of events. The road ahead was going to be challenging, but I was ready to reclaim my life and show them that I was stronger than they ever thought. It's strange how a single conversation can change everything. That evening when I overheard Ryan and Karen plotting their plan to use me for Karen's birthday gift, I felt a surge of clarity. I wasn't just a victim in this situation. I was someone who could take control and turn things around. I just had to be smart about it. Ryan and I continued our daily routines, but the tension was palpable. I kept the investigators' findings close to my chest, using every ounce of willpower to avoid confronting him. My resolve was to make sure my exit would be as powerful as it was calculated. I needed to hit them where it would hurt the most, and that meant waiting for the right moment. Karen's 72nd birthday was approaching, and I knew this would be my chance. It would be the perfect opportunity to set my plan in motion. I decided to host a grand dinner at one of Portland's most luxurious restaurants. It would be a night of elegance and extravagance, a night that would end with a bang, literally and metaphorically. As the day of the birthday dinner drew nearer, I was meticulous in my preparations. Every detail was accounted for: the menu, the seating arrangement, the timing. I wanted everything to be perfect. Ryan and Karen, unaware of my plan, were focused on their own excitement. Karen was particularly looking forward to the event, basking in the attention and luxury of the evening. The night of the dinner arrived, and everything went according to plan. The restaurant was filled with the rich and the powerful, and Karen was in her element, enjoying the spotlight. Ryan seemed particularly proud, showing off how well he'd arranged the evening. I played my role perfectly, looking every bit the supportive wife, though inside, I was a storm of anticipation. As the evening drew to a close, Ryan took the floor to make an announcement. The guests fell silent, their curiosity piqued. With Karen at his side, Ryan looked at me and said, "Megan and I have decided to part ways. We're getting a divorce." His voice was steady, but I could see the anxiety behind his eyes. Karen's face was a mask of faux sympathy, though I could sense the glee behind her composed expression. The room erupted in murmurs, but I remained calm. I had prepared for this moment. As we left the restaurant, I made sure Ryan and Karen would be left with the bill. Earlier in the evening, I had blocked access to our shared bank account, making sure they were stuck with the $25,000 restaurant bill. It was a small but satisfying act of revenge. Once we were outside, I put my plan into action. I had a folder with me, containing divorce papers and a copy of the prenuptial agreement. Ryan's confusion was evident when I handed them over. The prenuptial agreement clearly stated that if either party was unfaithful, they would owe the other $70,000. Ryan's face went pale as he read the document. "What is this, Megan?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Consider it a parting gift," I replied coolly. "I've had enough of your lies and manipulation." Karen tried to intervene, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Megan, you don't need to do this," she said, her voice desperate. "Let's talk about this." I ignored her. "I've made my decision," I said firmly. "I'm leaving, and you'll have to deal with the consequences." The look of disbelief on Ryan's face was something I would never forget. I knew it was going to be a rough few days for them, but I was determined to stand my ground. They had used me, belittled me, and tried to discard me as if I were nothing. This was my chance to show them that I was not someone to be underestimated. As I walked away from the restaurant, I felt a strange mix of relief and empowerment. The next morning, I knew I had to confront Ryan and Karen with the reality of their situation. They would have to come to terms with the fallout of their actions and the financial burden I had imposed upon them. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that my actions had set the stage for a new chapter in my life. The journey wasn't over, but I had taken the first crucial step in reclaiming my power and my dignity. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was determined to face it with the strength and resolve I had rediscovered within myself. The morning after Karen's birthday dinner was one of the most surreal moments of my life. I had managed to turn the tables, but the reality of what lay ahead started to sink in. Ryan and Karen were left reeling from the shock of the divorce papers and the $70,000 I was entitled to. I knew they'd be desperate, but I was resolute. This was my moment to reclaim my life and dignity. I decided to confront them at their home, where the tension would be palpable. As I drove over to their house, my mind raced with thoughts of what I might face. Ryan might try to convince me to drop the case, and Karen would undoubtedly attempt to manipulate me further. But I was prepared for their pleas. I had made up my mind and was not going to be swayed. When I arrived, I could see Ryan pacing anxiously in the front yard. Karen stood beside him, her face a mask of feigned calm. They looked up as I approached, and I could see the mix of anger and desperation in their eyes. "Megan, we need to talk," Ryan said, his voice strained. "This isn't necessary. We can work something out." I took a deep breath and met his gaze firmly. "I don't think there's anything left to discuss, Ryan. I've made my decision. The prenuptial agreement is clear, and I'm entitled to the $70,000 due to your infidelity." Karen, trying to maintain her composure, stepped forward. "Megan, please. This is not the time for harsh decisions. We can come to an arrangement, can't we? Let's sit down and discuss this reasonably." I shook my head. "There's nothing to negotiate. I've already consulted my lawyer, and everything is in order. I'm not changing my mind." Ryan's face grew darker. "You're ruining everything for us, Megan. You know this will cause a lot of trouble. You're going to regret this." I remained calm. "If you think I'm going to regret standing up for myself after all the lies and manipulation, you're mistaken. I'm done being a pawn in your games." The confrontation didn't last long. They were clearly frustrated and out of options, but their attempts to sway me only made me more resolute. I handed them a copy of the divorce papers and the prenuptial agreement once more, just to make sure there was no misunderstanding. I could see the reality hitting them as they read through the documents. Ryan's face was a mix of shock and anger, while Karen's eyes darted nervously. They knew they were facing a significant financial burden, and it was clear they were worried about their future. Before leaving, I made it clear that I was moving forward with my life and that they should do the same. "This is my final decision," I said. "I'm leaving this chapter behind and starting anew. I hope you both find a way to move on, but I won't be part of your lives any longer." I walked away feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The sense of closure was bittersweet, but it was the beginning of a new journey. I knew that I had made the right choice and that my actions were justified. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was prepared to face whatever came next with the strength I had found within myself. The financial settlement wasn't just about the money, it was about taking back my power. I had endured too much and sacrificed too much to let myself be sidelined by Ryan and Karen's schemes. Their attempts to use me for their benefit had only fueled my determination to succeed on my own terms. As I settled into my new life, I focused on the positive changes I could make for myself. The journey wasn't easy, but I was ready to embrace the future with a renewed sense of purpose. The confrontation was over, but the lessons learned would stay with me forever. It's strange how quickly life can change after such a dramatic shift. When I finally left Ryan and Karen behind, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The days following our confrontation were a whirlwind of activity as I finalized the divorce and prepared to start fresh. The $70,000 settlement gave me the financial freedom I needed to carve out a new life, but it was the emotional liberation that mattered most. My first priority was to find a new home. I wanted a place where I could rebuild my life and truly feel at peace. After weeks of house hunting, I stumbled upon a charming little house on the outskirts of Portland. It wasn't extravagant, but it was cozy, surrounded by a beautiful garden and a sense of tranquility that I had longed for. When I moved in, it felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. The small house quickly became my sanctuary. I spent hours planting flowers, setting up my favorite furniture, and making it truly mine. Gardening became a new passion, something that allowed me to focus on the present and forget the chaos of my past. I had heard rumors about Ryan's new relationship and the trouble he was facing, but I made a conscious effort to stay away from the gossip. My priority was to focus on my own well-being and to embrace the simple pleasures that came with my newfound independence. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets of information from old acquaintances, but I chose to ignore them. My peace of mind was worth more than any of the drama I had left behind. Life in my new home was fulfilling. I enjoyed quiet mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons tending to my garden, and evenings reading or working on small projects. The stability I found in my routines was comforting. I had finally managed to separate myself from the toxic influences of Ryan and Karen and was able to focus on what made me truly happy. One day, while I was working in the garden, I thought back on everything that had led me here. The betrayal, the manipulation, and the emotional turmoil had been overwhelming, but they had also made me stronger. I realized that I had emerged from the experience with a deeper understanding of myself and a renewed sense of self-respect. As I reflected on the past, I was grateful for the strength I had found to stand up for myself and make the difficult decisions necessary for my well-being. The journey had been far from easy, but it had taught me invaluable lessons about self-worth and resilience. The final chapter of my story with Ryan and Karen was over, but it had set the stage for a new beginning. I had taken control of my life and had chosen to prioritize my own happiness. The scars from the past were a reminder of my strength and the importance of never settling for less than I deserved. In the end, my life was about moving forward, cherishing the present, and embracing the future with open arms. I had found contentment in the life I was building for myself, and that was more valuable than any amount of money or material possessions. The story of my journey, from betrayal to empowerment, was a testament to the power of self-respect and the importance of reclaiming one's life after hardship. I had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, ready to enjoy the simple, fulfilling life I had always wanted. The final thought I want to leave behind is that no matter how difficult the road may be, there is always hope and strength within us to overcome the challenges. My story is one of resilience and renewal, and it is a reminder that we all have the power to shape our own destinies.